So welcome and hello and good morning to you all. My name is Silvana Masella. I'm the CEO of Trust IT Services and I coordinate the ICTFOOTPRINT.eu coordination action co-funded with the European Commission. Now today we have a very stimulating webinar. The title is The Industrial Approach and Support from Standards in Minimizing ICT Carbon Footprint. And what we've wanted to do in this hour is actually have various insights to standardized approaches on this phenomenon that is changing the way we think, and that will be from ITU and the Green Grid, and then an industrial approach from VMware. Now in particular, if we zoom in on our three speakers, we will have our first speaker, who's Rÿtimann, who is the Vice President of the Green Grid, and he will be giving insights on the EN standard approach. Joe Baguley, who's Vice President and CTO of EMEA at VMware, and Manuel Canet, Vice Chairman Working Party of ICT and Climate Change at ITU. So without further ado, I'd like to give our audience a quick high-level zooming in of ICT footprint, and then we'll move into our first speaker of the webinar. So ICTFOOTPRINT.eu, the fact that we're putting on these webinars, and we have 10 to do in a total of 36 months, this is one part of the activity we're looking at, is to sensibilize our European audience on how they can try and reduce their ICT carbon footprint. And we want to become, and we hope we are, the consolidated effort in Europe that helps raise awareness on different types of products or services or solutions on offer from organizations that help measure the energy and environmental efficiency of the ICT sector. And the fact that we have two representatives from SDOs is because there are a series of ICT methodologies that have been analyzed that actually focus on this specifically. You can see from the slide deck we have listed who our stakeholders are, and with that we want to have an opportunity with ICT Footprint to actually provide a platform for these organizations who have already or in the pipeline their own tools or products and services that can be introduced to help you understand your lowering your carbon footprint in ICT. And with that, we've indicated here our major outputs. So I said we were a support activity that helps spread the word on lowering your ICT carbon footprint. And with that, we're pulling out this marketplace for both buyers and sellers, so you can find or sustainable ICT suppliers, or you can publish your ICT sustainable services. A series of webinars where we actually learn something around this topic. A help desk in 5 languages. We're also interested in listing success stories around the globe on how organizations are making energy savings on getting their carbon footprint reduction. And then I think the nicest thing that we have as a challenge over the 36 months is actually to put together a self-assessment tool for organizations to help you measure your own carbon footprint. And this is something that's going to come out, a first edition at the end of December of this year, and we hope to have those listening to actually test this and so we can receive your feedback on that. So without further ado, I shall move in to pass the floor to our first speaker of our the webinar today. That's Rÿtimann. His title for his talk will be on EN 50600 Data Center Standard Series for Infrastructure and Facilities. So the floor is all yours, Lance. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm very pleased and happy to participate in today's webinar. Just very shortly about the Green Grid. It is a global organization with a mission to drive accountable, effective, and resource-efficient end-to-end ICT ecosystems by establishing metrics and driving an understanding of risk and proactively engaging to influence effective policy. So we're going to discuss today or review today the EN 5600, but not in all details. I'm going to pick out those specific aspects that are effective for the topic that we're looking at, and it's about reducing the footprint. The slides as such contain more information, but we will focus on those with regards to today's topic. So in the contents, we're going to be looking at the motivation for an EN standard. I'll talk a little bit about what an EN standard means for the European market, the key aspects of the 5600. We'll talk about the energy efficiency levels, the structure, and a summary, then additional information. So the motivation of the EN 5600, and we can see this more or less as kind of the back end of the whole ICT world, because we're focusing here on the data center itself, was to develop a comprehensive standard for data centers, and it's focusing here on the infrastructure and the facilities. So not so much then the IT and the associated equipment that goes with it, but everything that supports that. There is an exponential growth, of course, that we know is going on, so the need for such a standard has been there. There are a number of different design issues that are coming up on how to reduce the amount of energy use, and to make sure that we, as we go forward and actually build more data centers, start to grow the amount of capacity that we will need for all the different things that we're going to be doing in the future, that we don't encroach too much on the environment. We're going to need sufficient power to be able to run that. There are, of course, other aspects that were in the motivation of the data centers, has to do with areas of such as fire safety and security, but that we will leave then for today. You can read more about it in the slides that will be made available. So one of the questions that keeps coming up very often is EN standards. Is this a must? Is it something that I have to do, or can I do it? Well, first off, an EN standard, a European norm, is a document, whether it's to do with data centers or any other standard for any other product or service. It is an agreement among all the members of the European Standards Organization. So those are all the EU member states, all the EFTA states, Turkey, and others that have committed to making use of European norms in place of their own national standards. And in the drawing that you're seeing in front of you, we're looking at the area within what we call the public standards and norms. The important part about such standards is that they are designed and created by all the interested parties, including the public, the industry, end users, and it's conducted through a transparent and open and consensual process. So it represents absolutely a standard that is applicable for the end users and for the industry. It's a good benchmark when wanting to understand very quickly if the acknowledged use of technology has been applied or not. So the series focuses, as I said, on the infrastructure facilities of the data centers. We're looking at issues around the business risk, operating cost analysis. We want to know if the general aspects have been defined to support effective operation of telecommunications. Then we have, of course, the area classification system for availability and security, and we're going to go more into focus or into topic then on the energy efficiency aspect. Also the lifetime of the data center and some other aspects that are important in the overall review of such a data center, but we'll skip over those for today. The target groups that the standard is focused on is certainly then the owners, the facility managers, and the ICT managers and project managers, main contractors, designers. We also have, of course, a large group of consultants, architects, building designers, and all those companies and suppliers of equipment that go into such a data center and also operating the data center, plus we also have the installers and the maintainers. So what does this say then for you? As you'll see later on, we're looking at the energy efficiency aspect. The standard is then guaranteeing that not only the design of the equipment and the site has met a specific standard, but also the operation and the upkeep of this site would then be within the EN 5600, respectively, within the defined standard of the or text of the 5600. Now, some of the key aspects, and it's actually three main parts. Talked already just about this before. The availability is one issue. The measures from unwanted events. But look at the third point: the method and the process to address the energy efficiency and sustainability. And all these three aspects, they must link in with each other. So the availability of the data center is one aspect, but the energy efficiency and sustainability is something that needs to be looked at, and we'll see that as we move forward in detail. So the next two slides, I'd like to not go too much into detail, just to give you an overview that we see that we do have availability classes for example, for the environmental control, an area that does take a significant amount of energy if a data center is not properly designed. And there are different classes from the availability from 1 up to 4, something that many of us are already today familiar with. But you'll see that the environmental aspect and also the power distribution is considered in the availability class and comes through also in the energy efficient levels. On the slide here, there's a slight mistake. It says here the availability classes, actually it's the protection classes. We'll get this corrected, but for the topic today, this slide is not so important. I would like to spend some time on this particular topic. So the energy efficiency levels, when are they decided on? Well, the first step, of course, is outlining the concept. What are the objectives then of the data center with regards to its availability, to its protection, but how is this going to impact the energy efficiency levels? What needs to be done? So the standard then says you need to choose one of 3 different levels. And of course, this has an impact. The decision will be made based on the type of data center, on the size of it, and its function. First off, being that you would have a measurement where we're looking at a data center as a whole. The second, we're looking at very specific aspects of the facilities and the infrastructure within the data center. And the third is where you're looking at looking at the data center at a very detailed level, where we're looking at as much equipment as possible to gain as much information as possible to be able to do as much fine-tuning as possible. Again, this is just the beginning at the design phase, but you can see that this carries through into the operation of the data center and its upkeep. So how is this all put together? Well, the slide that you're looking at right now is broken into 4 different, I should say 5 different parts. So we talked about the concept, and I gave you an example about the energy efficiency levels that's in the general concepts. Once that's been defined there, then we're looking in the design and in the build, and we see here things that will impact the building construction, things that will impact the power distribution, the environmental control, less in the telecommunication, the security systems or fire safety and security systems. However, I would like to note that in the fire safety systems, there is also the opportunity there, as outlined in the document, to choose extinguishing or suppression systems that are more environmentally friendly, using inert gases in the place of chemicals. Then under the operation, we have the management and operational information. So everything that's been in the design and the build has to flow into the operation itself. And the KPIs, as we see here, we're looking at an overview, and presently 2 KPIs are built into there, one being the power usage effectiveness, but definitely has a one-to-one impact on the energy efficiency. Yes, we know that the PUE has a bit of a bad reputation because of some of the misuse, but we're looking at now a standard that's at ISO IEC level that's been integrated also into the EN 5600. And by the way, during the integration into the standard, had received a lot of critical review, and there will be corrections made also at the international level to make it clear how the power usage effectiveness is calculated. Also the renewable energy factor. So you'll see that these 2 areas are clearly focusing on the energy efficiency and on the sustainability. Then best practices. Many of you might be familiar with the EU Code of Conduct, which has been quite successful in the last 7 to 8 years. This has now become part of the EN 5600 in the Part 99.1, which is then reviewed on an annual basis. Then you'll see that 99.2 and 99.3, these are parts that are just now in progress. The 99.2 is looking at the environmental sustainability, an excellent piece of work that's going to complement exactly these topics about reducing the footprint. And last but not least, the assessment of conformity. So why is the assessment of conformity so important? Well, if you as a procurement person would wanted to know, is my supplier compliant with respect to certain aspects of the 5600 in the area of energy efficiency sustainability, that will, in the very near future, be possible by attaining a third-party assessment of conformity. Makes your job, from a procurement point of view, much simpler. So what we talked about just before, I'd like to summarize just in this slide, and then I'll go to some additional information before I finish off. The whole concept behind this, behind the standard, is making sure that there is a holistic approach. And we'll see that on the left and the right, we're talking about protection availability, but there's a major piece that has to do with the energy efficiency and the sustainability. And it starts at the beginning with defining what it is that we want to achieve, then how are we going to achieve it, and how we do achieve it with the design and build and the commissioning, and how do we maintain those objectives that we defined, and how do we improve on them. And how do we improve on them? You see at the bottom line there, expertise and best practices. So the 99-1, respectively, the EU Code of Conduct, or the other documents that will be flowing into there in the form of best practices. On a comparison table, for some of you who are looking to see, well, what certifications or what conformity claims are being made, you'll see that the EN 5600 is by far clearly the only one out there right now which is focusing very specifically on the energy efficiency, point 1, point 2, tying the energy efficiency aspect into the overall design and operation of the data center. So this is a big plus for those of you who are looking for providers who are going to be able to give you document on how they are achieving their own footprint reductions, which of course has an impact on your sustainability and footprint targets. So we're coming almost to the last slide. I have some additional information that I'd like to provide here for you from a European point of view. There is a website, and you'll see the links at the very bottom on the left-hand side on green data centers. There's a coordination group within Europe called the Coordination Group on Green Data Centers, CENELEC, ETSI, CGGDC. This group gets together twice a year to coordinate the activities and to exchange information amongst all those that are interested and involved in the European standardization world, but they also interact then with all the other global organizations. There's also been a document that's been published just this year. It's been updated. It's the third edition on the European standardization ICT for green data centers, the Green Data Center Landscape 2016. I recommend that as good reading. Then the ICT Footprint Group has been quite active in mapping out ICT standards. Not a very easy task to do. And those of you who are involved or have ever taken an attempt at doing this realize that that's a very challenging task. I'd like to outline that document is there. It's respectively that web page is there. And I've provided the link at the very bottom. Then, if you're looking for additional information or you're interested in getting involved in the Senelec Technical Committee 215 Work Group 3, here's information on the website. The secretary is the German Electric Technical Commission, or DKE, in Frankfurt am Main. I'd like to thank you for your attention and look forward to any questions that might be submitted. Thank you very much.
Lance, thank you very much for that insightful presentation on EN. Before handing over to Joe, we already have a couple of questions from the audience, and in fact I invite any of you who are listening in to take the opportunity to put any questions in now, that we can tackle them also at the end of the webinar too. Now, they're pretty similar, these two, so I'm going to try and encompass them into one. The first, Lance, that says, what are the main practical interests for a data center to apply standards to their facilities? Okay. The second one regards citizens. Do you think that we can sensibilize citizens and various target groups by making some awareness activities as part of national digital agendas? Now, the whole thing, we know, standards groups, and Jean-Manuel will tackle this as well, I believe in the last presentation, you do this huge effort, okay, of putting specs together and standards. And then, our job, for example, in ICT Footprint is to sensibilize the audience enough, or stakeholders, to get them interested in making sure that they're adopted, which is a very difficult thing to do. And so if I don't have incentives, it's difficult for me as a citizen to then do something with the ICT methodologies that have been developed or whatever. And I think the questions here are quite interesting. If something's forced into a national digital agenda, this then gives rise to people sitting up and saying, okay, well, I'm forced to do this, okay? And the same applies, I think, for the data center question too. What incentives are there that then I'm aware of and make sure I can adopt whatever standards are out there for my facilities? So I think a general feedback on that, Lance, if you're able to, just briefly, on your thoughts on these, and whether you share whether you could share these thoughts that I've just given you too. Over to you.
I think this could be a discussion that almost takes an hour in itself, but let me keep this down to just a couple of minutes. I very much understand that very often standards are seen as more or less a restriction to innovation, and that's obviously not their objective. So this group has clearly understood that there must be a solution there for the growing number of data centers, and being able to provide some answers on how to do this, how to achieve the targets with regards to energy efficiency, but that the energy efficiency is not the only issue. There are others that have to be encompassed in there. So if we all agree that we are going to grow as a digital society and we're going to need more data centers, but our limits for energy availability are there, then this is something that has to happen. And we need to encourage everybody to follow these guidelines so that so we don't run into the problems we're trying to avoid. There is, by the way, also a very key reason why, especially in Europe, why EN standards should be followed. That has to do with more with legality. If something was to happen, which could make you or put you in front of a court with respect to negligence or even civil suits, by being able to show that you are in compliant with an EN makes the arguing for your legal department much simpler. Those who are interested can contact me. I've written some articles on that particular topic. Making these standards the awareness of these standards for the general public, very difficult topic. So if somebody out there has an idea, it'd be great. The groups that make the standards are the ones who write the standards. Unfortunately, Santana, like Canetsi, have not seen themselves as those that should be out there propagating and marketing the standards. But let's hope that changes in the future, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here today to talk about the 5600.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lance. Thank you very much. So with that, I'm going to move over to Joe Baguley, who is Vice President, CEO, EMEA at VMware. I'm thrilled and delighted to have Joe with us. Very difficult, I know, for three of you, difficult time of the year, and so this is most appreciative. What I did was read the VMware Global Impact Report 2015, The Force for Good. And as a result of that, I thought, oh, there's some really cool things in here. And maybe Joe can spend some time giving some insights on the parts related clearly to ICT and what VMware is doing there. And so Joe kindly pulled out some key features for that, which he's going to talk to you about now. And with that, I'll pass the floor to you, Joe. Thank you very much.
That's great, Silvana. Thank you very much. So, yeah, I've got a short time here. I don't want this to be a VMware advert. I very much want it to be kind of, thoughts in the field and a little bit of thinking from inside VMware, a little bit of context. I actually, especially in the context of what we were just talking about, I was the founder of the Data Center Specialist Group of the British Computer Society and was one of the key people behind the best practices section of the Code of Conduct for Data Centers. And I've been involved in energy efficiency and awareness subjects for a very long time now and in fact run sustainability as a strategy within VMware here in EMEA. And what I wanted to do was highlight a little bit about VMware, let you understand what we're doing, but more importantly talk about the report that Silvana talked about and what's going on there and why we're kind of doing that. So the title that we have here, if I get my slides to go, a little bit about VMware, is that we were founded in 1998. We're about, actually it's a bit wrong that, we're just over 19,000 employees. Headquartered in Palo Alto, California, Californian company, tend to be very forward-thinking, very energy conscious in California, and that's rubbed off across the company worldwide. In fact, we're very proud of the fact that our US sites are 100% carbon neutral. We were the first people to voluntarily purchase carbon offset in the US in the context of our buildings. At the same time, our offices are all 100% renewable energy powered, and our buildings, we're the highest level of LEED, and specifically in Europe, our new head office in Staines, we're very proud to be green certified, and that was a direct result of a lot of effort that we put in. Specifically, actually, the provision of support for electric vehicles, and I run sort of the electric vehicle strategy as well, and I'm driving an awareness session for that, and we encourage our employees to take part in that too. So, from VMware's perspective, the force for good is very much driven by our own sense of social responsibility. You hear a lot of people talk about corporate social responsibility. And we launched this global impact report. It was part of our sustainability framework, which is called VMware 2020. Now, everyone has to have some kind of project with 2020 in the title at the moment, I think, so this is ours. But realistically, VMware 2020 is about the fact that we want to put more back into the environment, society, and the global economy than we take. Now, this came from a very interesting discussion that we were having internally. I'm just going to just flick through a little bit too much here about actually what's in the slides. Because as a corporation, we realized we have two impacts, or three really. But the impact is what we do as a corporate in terms of our people towards the planet. But at the same time, what do our products do for the planet? And one of our commitments is not only, empowering our global community to diversity, inclusion, and sustainability in their efforts, but more importantly, our products to make sure that we're integrating sustainability into what we're doing. So a lot of us in the company thought, well, we've always been doing that. In fact, virtualization was written into the Code of Conduct as a best practice. So we wanted to dig a little bit more into what that is and what that meant. So as a direct result of some work that we did with IDC, we looked at these sustainability pillars and drove into some of the figures behind it. Now, one thing that came out was the fact that every time we virtualize a server, every time we take a server from being physical to being a virtual server, which is the driver behind cloud, by the way, we save 4 metric tons of CO2. So every time you virtualize one server, that is the equivalent of one car being driven 9,000 miles or 9 barrels of oil. So over and above what's going on in terms of physically building data centers, I'm specifically talking about reducing what we have to put in data centers, and thereby also reducing the need for more data centers or minimizing the need for more data centers as much as is physically possible. And so the impact that we've had through doing that means that globally, since launch when we were 16 years ago, we've saved over 340 million megatons of CO2, which is the equivalent of 603 million megawatt hours of energy, which on this slide tells you it's the equivalent of avoiding emissions from powering 43% of the US for a year. But in fact, that's also the same as, I think, Spain, Italy, and Germany and Switzerland for a year in Europe has been saved through virtualizing servers. And in fact, let's talk about what that is and what that actually means. Virtualization is where what we're saying is instead of each individual compute job running on its own dedicated piece of hardware, virtualization is a technology that allows us to take that compute job and virtualize it, make it into something that doesn't have to be tied to anything particularly physical, and in fact can be moved around whilst it's still running. So a good idea here is that we can, on average, our customers, we're seeing 75% of them are getting 17-to-1 ratio. So they're getting 17 original old physical servers and running them on one physical server now, thanks to virtualization. That's a saving of about 64 tons of CO2 per year per physical server host now. And that adds up really, really fast. And a lot of our customers tell us that they've reduced their energy consumption and their costs by as much as 80%. There's some really good examples we've got from our customers that directly relate to what was just being talked about with regards to how we should be building data centers more effectively and how that should impact us. Solvay Pharmaceuticals, big pharmaceutical company, estimates that they saved over £1.5 million in hardware costs and power and cooling. But my utter favorite, apart from the World Wildlife Fund, which reduces its carbon footprint through virtualization, is Johnson Controls. Now this company's great, because they got a 20-to-1 consolidation ratio. So for a room where they previously had 20 servers, they now have one server. And they drove their consolidation from 0.1% up to 70% consolidation. And so these guys were on the verge of buying in-room chillers, in-room AC, to handle the heat load. But with virtualization, they actually regained 32 tons of spare cooling capacity. So the power of doing this is really quite dramatic. And some of the figures that we worked on with the analysts, and more specifically, goes much, much wider than just the energy consumption. This is the new server shipments avoided through to the use of server virtualization software. Now, we say VMware here, but equally there's others available. There's Zen, which is used by Amazon. There's Microsoft Hyper-V. There's other hypervisors here. But virtualization as a strategy is, without a doubt, priority for all of this. So if we're looking at how do we reduce data center impact and how do we reduce the impact of computers as compute requirement grows, as I'll talk about in a minute, virtualization of those workloads is mightily important. Here you'll see the light blue lines are the predicted servers that would have been bought if we hadn't gone through consolidation and virtualization. And so the severance is avoided with there in the dark blue. At the same time, the next slide here, we talk specifically about the worldwide power consumption reduction associated with those products, and that's highlighted in the report as well, and some of the figures that I talked about before, just through consolidating servers. And obviously, that power reduction, along with the reduction of the production of the servers to run them, actually means we have quite a dramatic reduction in CO2 emissions, not only in the running of the servers, but also in the servers that never had to be made to even run in the first place. And we're just getting started. Technologies are now really advancing down the line. So one of the things we talk about now is distributed power management or host power management. Now what that is if you can imagine that I've got, let's just simplify this, 10 servers, and each of those servers is running 10 virtual servers. So I've got 100 virtual servers running in my data center, whatever that is, quite a small one. Those servers aren't running full power all the time. In fact, you might find at night time or at off-peak times, you probably find they don't need 10 physical servers worth of power. And we can consolidate down. Instead of having 10 servers per server, I could get that down to maybe 30 servers per server or 40 servers per server. Host power management means that we can now intelligently do that and actually move these servers whilst they're running to run on less physical hosts and turn off the physical servers that aren't needed right now, and then turn those servers back on again as demand increases and move those services back out to be run on those. So in addition to consolidating in the first place, we can further consolidate based on load to reduce the energy requirements of that data center in turn. At the same time, with virtual desktops can also reduce the requirement of actually pushing out a whole host of physical equipment out to everyone's desk, and instead run those applications centrally and share the applications to a host of far more energy efficient devices around the world. So there's a whole bunch more technologies that we're working on that are deliberately driven around energy reduction. And yes, some of that is through altruism. Of course it is. Some of it is we want to do energy. But actually, it's driven by cost. And people's virtualization of data centers was driven by cost. They realized that the largest thing they were spending money on in a data center was energy. So though some people initially were saying they were doing energy reduction from a CSR perspective, in fact, if we're truly honest, a lot of people were doing this because they were having to reduce cost. And so as we go forward and look at the upcoming world of IT and look at what people are looking at the moment, well, in 2010, the IT sector globally contributed to about 2% of emissions. The estimate is that as we grow our requirement for IT, as things like IoT and other advances even further increase the requirement for electronic and IT equipment, we can see that increase to go from maybe 5% to even 10% by 2020 in terms of global consumption of energy. Now, obviously, there's arguments. We made these arguments back during the Code of Conduct when we look about useful work metrics that were better than PUE, et cetera, that you could argue that we may be 10%, but look at what it's saving in terms of what could have been done otherwise than that, and look at the good that that 10% is being invested in. So I think actually when you look at this going forward, as part of the public face of this, we have to think to ourselves, how can we not only say, look, we're doing the best we can to reduce the consumption of energy and make IT as energy efficient and, more importantly, planet friendly as possible, but at the same time point out the good that we're doing, because it may well be that those compute resources are the ones that are actually doing the weather modeling. They're the ones doing the climate change analysis. They're the ones solving human genome problems. They're the ones diagnosing cancer, whatever it is. And so pointing out the force for good that's being done by ICT is also very, very important here, so that we don't at some point get vilified as the energy hogs of the future, which is a great threat and has been for many years in the IT industry. So by current trajectory, that DC energy use is rising, as we said, from about 2% in 2010 to about 5% in 2020. That would require 43 medium-sized power plants alone. And we believe that through virtualization and more intelligent use of application resources and application resources and how they're applied to using compute resources could actually cut that growth rate in half. And so I think that what you're going to see as we go forward in our industry is a drive around energy-efficient coding. As we expose up higher and higher up the stack, and when you talk about exposing cost to people, one of the great things about cloud is the cost of computing is being exposed all the way up to the developer. Now with technologies like platform as service and even serverless, developers are becoming increasingly aware of the cost of running their application and may be driven more and more by writing more cost-efficient applications. And as energy is a large portion of any cost that's exposed in compute resources, we can only hope that as we further drive cost exposure up the stack, which is what myself and many others in the industry are trying to do, we can also drive those creating these applications to think more energy efficiently as they're doing it. And with that, I'm pretty much finished with my short piece on what's going on at VMware and how we care not only about what our personal impact as a company is, but the study that we did, and it's available in the Force for Good report that's available for free on our website, and as Savannah mentioned earlier, has all these details linked through to the IDC study as well with this data too. So I encourage you to read it, and I'm happy to take questions either now or at the very end of this session when we've finished. Thanks, Savannah.
Brilliant, Joe. Thank you very much for that. I sort of say, oh, let's do the questions at the end, but I think it's always best to actually do them immediately after the person's talk, because it's fresh in our mind. Question from me before I go to the ones that have been put up by the participants. Well, it's not a question, actually, it's just a comment. You have probably loads, well, I know you have lots of lots of success stories. So I would also like to come back to you offline and see if we can get any of these published on the platform. We've already put up a few success stories, And
we can talk about the World Wildlife Fund, Qualcomm, Johnson, all those guys, and the work they've done there specifically. Yeah, definitely.
Precisely, I saw them, so that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Over to the screen. There's one for you, which is, are there other aspects important to consider in addition to VMs and server consolidation to reduce the CO2 emissions?
Most definitely. And I would say the two other things to consider here are networking and storage. We all look at compute, but actually the networking equipment and the storage equipment in the data centers is often overlooked. And it sits in kind of a gray area between building infrastructure and compute, which is highlighted as the bad boy. In fact, what we're seeing in the rise of both software-defined data centers with things like software-defined storage and software-defined networking is that we're moving to more commoditized more commoditized network equipment, which means that ultimately it should be able to run more energy efficient because it's less dedicated. At the same time, we're also looking at in-server storage being aggregated in software as opposed to having huge separate SANs and NASs and storage arrays. So if you go and look at a highly energy efficient data center such as the ones that Google run or we run or Amazon runs, we don't actually have separate storage arrays or SANs or NASs, because it's not actually cost efficient or energy efficient to do so at massive scale. So we put disks, SSDs, which by their own virtue are both fast and energy efficient, actually in the servers themselves, and use software to create things like reliability, scale, and performance across those. And it's the same with networking. So I think as you see the drive towards networking and storage, there's massive savings to be gained in going to sort of more energy efficient, networking equipment with linear power supplies, and moving storage out from large dedicated arrays that run at full speed all the time into local storage within servers.
Yeah. That's probably also a message for us based on the question we asked before to Lance when we were saying about sensibilizing citizens and that and incentives. Maybe we should also, make sure we put some visibility around the networking storage as well.
It is. It's often overlooked. Yeah. It is often overlooked. Yeah. It's a small percentage of the equipment in a data center, typically 10 to 15% of maybe the total power load is, and I'm making these numbers up, but this is just my rough estimates, are things like networking and storage. But if you can reduce that and you add that up across a lot of data centers, it's a lot of energy. So it's all something that needs to be looked at and reduced.
Absolutely. And quickly for the last question, it says, if you're in the this is a clever one. If you're in the shoes of an ICT-intensive SME, that would be me, but not necessarily one that can make heavy use of virtualization. What would you focus your attention on to become carbon neutral?
Go find yourself a nice carbon neutral cloud provider and move everything to that. And I'm not joking. I'm not, and that's not flippant. To be honest, if you look at anyone operating a data center at scale is achieving efficiencies of scale, probably way better. Efficiencies based on scale, probably way better than you would as an SME running your little servers. So actually, by moving your stuff to the cloud, you'll probably find that from a global impact, energy impact, but also cost impact, it may be cheaper than doing things on premises, especially in very small to medium enterprises. So I think that maybe it's something worth investigating. And I think you're going to see, again, we already do have cloud providers that stand up and advertise themselves based on their clean credentials. There's a large number up in the Nordics that obviously advertise they're fully hydro-powered and highly green and all those kind of things. People like Verne Global, who are data center providers in Iceland, where everything there is entirely carbon neutral. That differentiator is going to increase as people go forward, especially for SMEs looking to make their change.
Excellent. Very good point, Joe. That always skips my attention as well. And you're right. We're constantly on the lookout for how we can improve our cloud provisioning. So, good, very good point there. Wonderful. Now, with that, we are coming up to our final webinar presenter, and that's Manuel Canet. So, thanks again, Lance and Joe. Please do stick around for our final intervention, and that's Manuel has kindly asked is kindly coming in, who's going to provide an overview of ITUT methodologies to assess the environmental impact of ICT. And I have a very nice quote to say to you. They've told me you are the best. Apparently, whoever knows this, it's Manuel. So isn't that a nice intro for you? So don't let us down, I think, is my next point. I'm just kidding. Over to you, Manuel.
My face is getting red now. Okay.
Sorry, we can't see it. Over to you.
So it's good.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Silvana. So good afternoon, good morning to everybody. I hope you are comfortably seated and listening to this very interesting webinar. So thanks a lot for attending, and I will then present the effort that has been done by the ITU, the ITUT to be precise. So the ITU, probably you all know, the ITU is the acronym for International Telecommunication Union. This is a UN agency based in Geneva, and altogether there are in this UN agency 193 member states and more than 700 sector members. Among the sector members, there are the telecom operators coming from every country in the world. There are many producers, manufacturers, some also companies producing some software, and also some education institutes. And in the frame of the International Telecommunication Union, there is a big department dealing with the production of standards. And this is the T sector that you are seeing, the letter T just after ITU. So for some years now, the ITU-T has been producing a very strong cooperative effort with other standard institutes like the ETSI, which is the European Telecom Standard Institute, the ISO, the Greenhouse Gas Protocol Initiative, the IEC, and also in cooperation with other organizations, other entities like the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, because the ITU is having a dialogue with the UNFCCC in particular after the Paris Agreement has been ratified, and also with the GHG, which is a Global E-Sustainability Initiative, an initiative with an important number of stakeholders to promote sustainability in the sector. So these methodologies, they are, well, related to the assessment of footprint, GHG carbon footprint of the sector, and I will go on with some details now. And these methodologies, they are serving mitigation purposes. The ITU is also having an effort relatively to adaptation with the production of documents showing some best practices, for instance. So you can see now on your screen the three first methodologies that are available. They are now available on the ITU website for free. So please feel free to download these documents. The following documents have been produced. So there is the L.1400, which is presenting, this is quite a short document presenting an overview and general principles on the assessment of energy and carbon footprint in the ICT sector. Then there is the L.1410, which is dealing with the environmental impact of ICT goods, networks, and services. This document, the revision, which is now in force, has been prepared jointly with the European Telecom Standard Institute, and it covers both what we call first order and second order effects of ICT. Let me give you an example. For the first order of effect of ICT, we are speaking, for instance, of a mobile phone, and we are this document, this recommendation, gives some guidelines on how to assess the energy impact and the carbon impact of the mobile phone over its full life cycle. That means from the raw material extraction, materials that are serving to produce the mobile phone, the impact that is coming from the usage by the customers of the mobile phone, and also the impact that is coming from the end of life of the mobile phone. So this is the first part of this document, L.1410. There is a second part in the document which is dealing with what we call the second order effects of ICT, that is to say the potential benefits that ICT are providing. let me give you another example. This part 2 of this document, of this standard, L.1410, is, for instance, providing guidelines on how to assess the impact of having a webcast like we are having now, or a video conference like you may have in a few hours or tomorrow, instead of traveling to a focus point. So there are some precise guidelines on how to assess the impact that is coming from, well, the service that is provided, that is to say, for instance, the webcast by itself, and also some guideline on how to compare with a reference scenario where everybody of us, the 63 of us, I see that we are now 63, which is great, if the 63 of us would have had to travel to the same place and to attend in a meeting. So these are the two parts of this document, L.1410. Then we have the L.1420, which is dealing with the environmental impact of ICT in organizations. And this document is covering both ICT sector organizations, so providing some clear guidelines on how to assess the energy impact and the carbon impact of an ICT organization over 1 year. The 1 year period is the reference period. But we are also here, the document is also providing some very precise guidelines on how to assess the impact of ICT in other kinds of organizations like banks, like insurance companies, public sector departments, and so on. So you will get this, if you are interested, for free on the ITU website following the link that you have here. So let me now continue with the two other documents that I wanted to share with you today. So there is the L.1430, which is dealing with the environmental impact of ICT projects. So this is a complement to our ISO standard. All the people that have contributed in the frame of the IT work to building these standards, they have done that with a dialogue with ISO or with other organizations, so that these are practical complement to existing other standards. So this one is providing guidance for the application of a specific methodology to assess the impact of some projects, what we call ICT projects that are aiming to reduce GHG emissions or energy consumption. Let me give you another example. A city is willing to install a specific road traffic flow optimization system, and they would like to launch this kind of project, and they would like to assess the benefits that will be brought by the launch and the performance of this project. This recommendation, L.1430, is providing clear guidelines on how to assess the impact of this kind of ICT project and the benefits that will occur. This may be very useful, for instance, when a city or company would like to get some funding to help to have this project develop and materialize, in particular in developing countries. So another interesting standard is L.1430. Then we have L.1440, and it's the last one that I will share with you today, which is dealing with the environmental impact of ICT in cities. So this one is specifically dedicated to cities with two parts. The first part relates to what we call the first order effects from the use of ICT goods and networks in a city. For instance, if the city of Brussels would like to assess what's the carbon impact of all the ICT goods and networks present in the city, they can follow this document, L.1440. And the part two, it relates to the impact of ICT projects and services, so rather the benefits that can be brought by ICT in a city. And for instance, this L.1440 is currently used by several cities in Europe in order to assess the impact of ICT, both from the first order effect and the second order effect. So I will quickly now go through the end of this presentation. You will have time to look at that afterwards. So yeah, there are here, I wanted to share with you the both aspects of ICT, positive aspects and benefits that can be brought, and the direct impact, or so-called negative aspects. And you will see then, well, the general principles that are guiding all these documents. Here you have to show you the first page of LDOT 1440. Also, all these documents, they are having the same shape and format. And this was to give you an example of the document structure with the two parts. We are using some quantification methodologies, and then we can have, there is an example of results of the GHG emissions in a city, at a city level, for various kinds of ICT present in this city. And this is it for me, so thanks very much for your attention.
Jean-Manuel, thank you very much. And with perfect timing, actually. If we go back to one slide just quickly, we have 5 minutes to go. Regarding the GHG emissions in the city, etc., and one of our partners is Eurocities, as you might be aware. And I'm always obsessed with trying to sort of get the end user engagement, because that's what ICT Footprint has to do as one of its KPIs, clearly. Is there anything we can do more to help you getting more visibility, more incentiveness from the end user that this is going on and it can benefit us? Or, you know, like today's webinar, for example, I'm thinking, how can we do more? Any ideas?
Yeah, thank you very much, Silvana. I think it could be good to have, since now this document has been produced and has been used also by several cities, it would be, I believe, a good time to for the ITU to give a presentation to Eurocities to show some results of the work that has been done, and to have discussion on how it can be used in other cities. So would be with pleasure.
Perfect. And then we have a question actually from our audience as well. Last one. From your standpoint and experience, do you see any major standardization evolutions coming up in this field from IT or other SDOs maybe that you've not stated here that we should know about?
Yeah. So what we have now is that, of course, the standardization evolutions that we are seeing in the field, they in particular relate to the technological evolution. That is to say that 5G is coming, the Internet of Things is coming, applications are developing very quickly in cities also, as we have just quickly seen. And from the work that has been done now, we can see that there will be further work specifically dedicated to the technological evolutions that are coming. Another angle of evolution which we see at the ITU level is also the fact that the ITU is taking very much into account the SDGs, which are the Sustainable Development Goals that have been set at the UN level, and then that are covering more than only the climate topic, but more broadly social and environmental topics. And we can see also that the evaluation of let's say ICT projects, ICT services according to SDGs is also another direction that can come, that is coming.
Perfect, Jean-Manuel. A very concise answer and detailed. I appreciate that. So with that, I will just go to our last slide to thank you personally, Jean-Manuel, Joe and Lance for your very dynamic input and presentations in time. I've left up here how you can stay tuned, what's going on. If you're not connected with us yet, please take advantage of that with following us on various items and social media channels. And if you're interested in participating in the next webinar, we'll be happy to listen from you. And I'm going to pick up the success stories with Joe, and we'll be speaking to Jean-Manuel and Lance anyway for the standards efforts. With that, I'd like to thank our speakers once again. Wish you all, speakers and participants, a wonderful, wonderful holidays, serene 2017, and season's greetings. Thank you very much. And with that, the webinar is now over. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.